now declare this 84th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in order. Colleagues, you will recall we had decided that we would hold a public hearing today on Chapter 2, Grant and Contribution Program Reforms. It flows from the Fall 2012 report of the Auditor General of Canada. Before I go any further on what's in front of us right this minute, I would like to just leave with colleagues something to consider. Should we conclude our rounds of discussion and questions and have time remaining, that would mean if we don't have an extension of the regular question rotation, then I would ask the committee to deal with some committee business. If we don't have time, it can hold till Thursday, but I think it would be in everyone's interest if we could take a stab at some of that work this afternoon, if we have the time. So I would just ask members to keep that in mind as we get towards the end of the rotation and make a determination whether they wish to continue or move into camera to deal with a couple of outstanding business matters there, one of which is significantly important. So, with that, I would like to welcome all our guests today. We have with us representatives from the Office of the Auditor General, the Treasury Board Secretariat, Public Health Agency, Canadian International Development Agency, Human Resources and Skills Development Canada, and Western Economic Diversification Canada. I would start with the Auditor General and ask Mr. Ferguson to introduce his delegation, if he has any with him, and to also commence with his opening remarks. Mr. Auditor General, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de nous...
Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our office's work related to Chapter 2 of our Fall 2012 report, Grant and Contribution Program Reforms. With me today is Frank Barrett, the principal responsible for this audit.
To individuals and to organizations of various types, including businesses and other governments. In 2010-11, transfer payments totaled $158 billion. The majority of those payments, $121 billion, were transferred to other levels of government and individuals through programs with ongoing spending authority. However, a significant portion, $37 billion, was transferred through grant and contribution agreements. Our audit focused on grant and contribution programs. In our 2006 audit on grant and contribution programs, we found that recipients had expressed concern about the heavy administrative burden associated with applying for programs and with meeting the various requirements of those programs. Later that year, an independent blue ribbon panel concluded that the government needed to make fundamental changes in the way it designed and managed its grant and contribution programs. In May 2008, the government announced an action plan to respond to the panel's recommendations. This plan committed the government to reducing the administrative and reporting burden on recipients of grant and contribution agreements.
In this audit, we looked at the implementation of the Government Action Plan to streamline grant and contribution programs and reduce the reporting burden on recipients. We assessed the actions of the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat to implement the commitments made in the Government Action Plan. We also examined specific actions taken by the Treasury Board Secretariat and 5 federal organizations to implement their respective obligations under the new policy on transfer payments, which was developed in 2008. Our audit work was completed in July 2012.
The government has fulfilled most of the commitments it made in its 2008 action plan, which was aimed at increasing efficiencies and reducing the administrative burden on recipients. The Treasury Board Secretariat actively led efforts to develop a new policy on transfer payments. It provided leadership and guidance to federal organizations to make the necessary changes, including coordinating activities across the government. The other federal organizations we examined have also taken actions on most of their obligations under the new policy on transfer payments. They have consulted with applicant and recipient communities in redesigning their grant and contribution programs, and they have begun to establish service standards. They have also conducted risk assessments of their programs and their recipient communities and have assigned a risk rating to each recipient based on the assessments. Cependant, Monsieur le Président,
but, Mr. Chairman, we also found that neither the Treasury Board Secretariat nor the other federal organizations we examined had assessed the impact of their actions on recipient organizations. Therefore, they were not able to determine the extent to which their actions had led to streamlined administrative processes within federal organizations or to a reduced administrative burden on recipients. We also noted that the Treasury Board Secretariat had not provided organizations with adequate guidance to ensure that risk ratings are accurate and remain current, despite the importance of these ratings in determining the controls that should be applied in each case. As such, we found that processes used by federal organizations we examined varied in rigor and depth.
Address to the Treasury Board Secretariat. The Secretariat agreed with both of them. The Public Accounts Committee may wish to ask the Secretariat for an update on its efforts to assess the impact to date on the administrative burden of recipients of grant and contribution agreements. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. We would be pleased to answer the committee's questions.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I have a listing of the witnesses, and for no other reason than this is the list that's in front of me, we'll hear our witnesses in this order. Following the presentation that we've just had, we'll hear from the Treasury Board Secretary, and I would also ask that each of the representatives, if you would introduce your delegation. So it'll be as follows: Treasury Board Secretariat, followed by Public Health Agency, CEDA, Human Resources and Skills Development, and lastly, but still importantly, Western Economic Diversification. Therefore, Treasury Board Secretariat, the Assistant Comptroller General, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you would permit a suggestion, we were going to make opening remarks on behalf of all departments, and I would do those in a few moments. I would be pleased to introduce the delegation of the departments to my right, and that would perhaps will save us a few moments, and then we can move from there. So assisting me today, Mr. President, Sue Stimson from the Canadian International Development Agency, the Chief Financial Officer of the organization. From Human Resources and Skills Development Canada, Ms. Nancy Gartner, the Director General of Program Operations Management and Accountability. From the Public Health Agency of Canada, Carlo Baudouin, the Acting Chief Financial Officer. And from the Western Economic Diversification Canada, Donald McDonald, the Director General of Operations. Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity to speak about Chapter 2 of the Fall 2012 Auditor General's Report on Grant and Contribution Program Reforms in the Federal Government. In addition to the role played by the Treasury Board Secretariat in leading the reforms, the Auditor General of Canada also examined selected activities undertaken in the following 5 federal organizations to implement the reforms, and I just named them. So I'd like to start by thanking the Auditor General for his work on this issue. As the report notes, the Auditor General last looked at how the federal government manages grant and contribution programs in 2006. At that time, concern was expressed about the heavy financial and administrative burden associated with applying for funding programs and with meeting the various requirements of these programs.
The President of the Treasury Board commissioned an independent Blue Ribbon panel on grant and contribution programs to recommend measures to make the delivery of grant and contribution programs more efficient while ensuring greater accountability. In its report, From Red Tape to Clear Results, published in December 2006, the panel provided recommendations aimed at simplifying the administration of grants and contributions while at the same time strengthening accountability and risk-based approaches for managing programs. The Government of Canada's action plan to reform the administration of grant and contribution programs, announced by the President of the Treasury Board in 2008, outlined how the government would improve the management of grants and contributions, as well as the expected results. The plan consisted of 3 elements. First, to build the right foundation, the new policy and transfer payments was introduced. This new policy and its supporting directive and guidelines have clarified accountabilities, simplified administration. The policy reform also established a new regime that is more sensitive to risks and is citizen and recipient focused. Second, departments developed their individual plans to fundamentally improve their delivery of grants and contributions. And thirdly, sustained leadership to help guide reform across government. New approaches were developed, shared, and implemented throughout government, such as risk-based management and oversight, simplified approval and claims processing, service delivery standards for recipients, consolidated multi-year agreements, and coordinated recipient audit approaches. Le rapport du vérificateur général souligne les progrès.
The Auditor General's report has recognized the progress made in implementing the action plan. The Treasury Board Secretariat actively led the policy reform, supported implementation of departmental action plans, and fostered coordinated activities across federal organizations. Federal organizations are increasingly using recipient monitoring and reporting requirements focused on risks. They are consulting applicants and recipients on program changes and establishing service standards. However, the report has also highlighted the need for additional work in 2 areas.
Assess the impact of efforts on departmental and recipients' administrative burden. In response, we are undertaking an assessment of the impact of our collective reform efforts as measured against the expected results in this regard, which were outlined in the action plan. In collaboration with federal organization, an assessment will be completed by fall 2013, and a final report will be made publicly available thereafter. The timing of this assessment aligns with the 5-year administrative review of the policy and transfer payments to commence spring 2013. The results of the assessment will be used to inform this policy review and to identify opportunities to further strengthen the policy. Secondly, we need to provide additional guidance to federal organizations to ensure that risk ratings they apply in the ongoing management of their programs and agreements are appropriate and current. We are working now with departments to strengthen the policy guidance related to risk management. The new guidance will provide clearer direction on the need to review and validate risk assessments throughout the life cycle of grants and contributions. We are looking to implement this in spring 2013. In closing, I would like to acknowledge the ongoing efforts of my colleagues and departments in implementing the action plan, and Mr. President, we look forward to answering your questions and those of the committee members.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Scrimger. We appreciate that. Unless there are any interventions to the contrary, I'm ready to take the committee into our rotation. Seeing and hearing none, then I'll move to Mr. Saxton, who is our first questioner to have the floor. Mr. Saxton, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today as well. My questions will be directed at the Auditor General and the Office of the Auditor General. In Chapter 2 of your report, you found that the government has adequately implemented the 2008 Government of Canada Action Plan to reform the administration of grants and contributions programs. Can you comment on how you came to this conclusion?
That was the focus of the audit, was looking back at our 2006 audit, assessing the recommendations that we had made in 2006, and assessing the progress the government had made against those. So our audit criteria was established based on the work that we had done previously, to then determine whether the government had or the departments had adequately addressed those concerns.
Right, but you found that the government had adequately addressed those concerns. Can you elaborate on how you came to that conclusion?
Yes, maybe if I can just add to what the Auditor General has already provided. In our report, we do have a brief table, Exhibit 2.1, that speaks to the three main chunks of the Government Action Plan, if I can put it that way. That the Treasury Board had to provide leadership, that it had to enter into policy reform, and that there had to be things happening in departments in terms of departmental action plans being implemented. So in conducting the audit, we looked to see what happened with respect to policy reform, what happened with respect to what did the Treasury Board Secretariat do vis-a-vis providing leadership, and what were we seeing happening within departments? Were we seeing things actually changing, if you will? And while we're, I believe, clear in the report, there's still more work to do, and I believe that's acknowledged around the table. We did recognize that there had been significant progress made since the 2006 report, and they were taking action consistent with their government action plan.
Thank you. Are you satisfied that all of the agencies and departments which you examined have taken important steps to implement the government's action plan?
As you indicated, our overall conclusion, which would have included all of the organizations we looked at, was that the federal government had adequately implemented the 2008 action plan. Again, there were some areas where there's still room for improvement, but overall we determined that it had been adequately implemented by the organizations that we looked at.
Thank you. Would you agree then that the agencies and departments adequately consulted with their applicant and recipient communities to better serve Canadians within the grants and contributions process?
That was certainly one of the things that we stated in the chapter that had happened, yes.
Thank you. Now, are there examples that you found particularly innovative or important in the ways proposed by the examined departments and agencies on their efforts to improve their grant and contribution program activities?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to address that question. There were a few, I think, key things that we saw very different than, I think, what had been observed in previous years. One of them was with respect to a very strong level of interdepartmental committees at the deputy minister level, the assistant deputy minister level, and then again at directors and directors general, you had departments coming together. Now, why does that matter? Because when they're talking about their different programs, that gives them an opportunity to actually foster innovative change. So one of the points that we make in the chapter is in paragraph 219 and on, we speak of the pilot projects, where in fact they realized that they had multiple departments. In this example we raised 7 different departments that all had contribution agreements with the same organization. So by putting all of their agreements together and saying, why don't we have one name and address, one common template, if you will, and let's see how we can streamline this. That was an example where they did manage to reduce the number of reports substantially. You say from 126 down to 26, and that's simply because it was now one agreement instead of 7 different ones.
Thank you. With regards to the risk challenge function, what would you find acceptable for a risk challenge function? And during your audit, did you find any examples of a risk challenge function that could be used as a model?
Yes, well, what we point out in the chapter is that not only is it important to establish criteria for determining the risks and then having a risk rating scale and going about and doing it, but there has to be some form, as you say, of a challenge function. And we did see, and just to sort of maybe highlight that a little bit, if you had a good scale and maybe one individual in a department going and rating these different agreements, the risk was that what gets rated on a Friday afternoon might not be as rigorous as it was rated in the middle of the week. So it's important within departments to have some form of challenge function to say, are we doing it well? We did see a variety of different scales. Some departments were certainly stronger than others. In fairness to the departments, though, it's important to note that there wasn't really a lot of guidance on what should be provided in terms of a risk rating scale. And that's why we made the recommendation to the Treasury Board that this was an area where it should be providing guidance.
Good. Sorry, time has expired. Thank you very much. And moving over now to Mr. Allen, who now has the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone, for being with us. And I guess to Mr. Ferguson, if I could, you stated that they looked at sort of 5 programs, if you will. Is there other additional programs out there that you didn't look at that would also fall into the category of having contribution and granting program?
Absolutely, there would be many other programs other than the ones that we looked at.
So it leads me to the next question. You said, sir, on part of your report on page 7 in the English version at 2.13, the last 2 lines, or 2.5 lines, if you will, it says, we note that the process, and the process you're talking about is actually based on the Blue Ribbon Panel of 2008, which is actually on Chapter 2 at 2.1 in the English version. That's the exhibit. It says, and I quote, we note that the process does not specify how the Secretariat plans to assess the impacts of the policy reforms, which is really in line with the Blue Ribbon Panel and then the Secretariat's action plan. So if the Secretariat came up with an action plan in response to your recommendation, which it did, but in your view, is this still correct in the sense that the action plan really won't assess the impacts of the policy reform? So we're looking at a piece and then looking at another piece, and we still don't really know the outcomes for the folks who are asking, what is it, are you helping me or not helping me, and do we know?
Yes, Mr. Chair, pleased to answer the question. There's actually a sort of a 2-part answer to this. We have had a chance just over the last couple of days to review the Treasury Board Secretariat's action plan in response to our recommendations, and they do specify in there, as I understand it, that they're going to be providing guidance to departments on how to go out and gather results-based information so they can roll it up. So on one hand, that speaks to, and maybe perhaps the Secretariat could elaborate on this, but that certainly speaks to how they would then have a consistent process for assessing results-based information. The other side of the coin that I think needs to be appreciated is that even once that guidance is provided, then departments can start collecting. But up to date, to my knowledge and what we saw till last July when we completed the audit, there was no results-based information really gathered and rolled up. So in terms of a 5-year review that provides an assessment, it's not evident to us what the 5-year review will be able to say was accomplished from a results base. Obviously, it can speak to many activities. Perhaps.
Mr. Scrimgeour, did you actually want to comment on that? Because I see you making some notes to yourself. No doubt you've got a comment.
Yes, it wasn't the grocery list. I would say that we agree that there was not, as is needed, a consistent way of building a pan-government view of the results of the work of the many departments and agencies. I believe that the departments and agencies themselves can certainly tell many results stories about and results outcomes of the work they have done, but we did not have a sort of systematic evidence-based way of gathering that information. It is one of the things following the Auditor General's work that we have been working feverishly at, and will be in the upcoming weeks implementing a performance reporting tool with the 28 departments and agencies that represent around 99% of the grant and contribution spending in the Government of Canada. They will be going through an information gathering stage over the next few months, and then bringing this back into the centre in the fall, as I mentioned in my opening comments, which will do a number of things for us. The first thing it will do is, one is that it gives us a benchmark in the 2013 year. We are also asking departments in their work to contrast where they are today, where they were in 2006, 2007, and 2008, so we can get a sense of that movement. That may be difficult in some cases. It may be relatively straightforward in others. But with the work done and to the extensive nature that it is done, it gives us that baseline that on a going forward basis we can
And
measure.
I appreciate that. I guess the obvious question is, why didn't you do it before when you implemented the blue ribbon panel? Why would you try to hit a mark that you couldn't actually look at it and say, well, I needed to get 85%, but I don't know if I wrote the test because I never marked it, and so I just don't know. I mean, why would you come through that process without actually saying, I wonder if it's successful on the outside? How did that not happen?
I suspect that when the plan was being formed some 6 or 7 years ago, that it just wasn't something that came across and having a consistent pan-government view of results, and that most people were focused on the results that would be occurring in departments. I think we have been quite rightly, the observation from the Auditor General is an accurate one, and one that I think we were aware of ahead of the observation, in the sense that it became quite obvious that we needed to have a better picture of results across government. I don't have an answer about why it wasn't part of the action plan 6 years ago. Perhaps I can just put it down to being one of the shortcomings in the action plan when it was first formed a number of years ago.
Thank you very much. Time has expired. Over now to Mr. Cramp. You have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you, Chair, and certainly welcome to our witnesses here again today. First, I think we as a committee have felt that it's extremely important that we continue to develop and share best practices. That seems to be an ongoing process of government. Obviously, we can learn from many, but of course we can share a lot of our best practices. I speak sort of on two hats here, because on public accounts, we like to hold the feet to the fire in order to identify best practices. And yet I also wear another hat as chair of GOPAC, Canadian Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption. My responsibility is to share those best practices with either developing countries that need our assistance, or perhaps other countries that we can even mentor with. And so my question, with that little bit of a preamble, then leads to the Auditor General on this. So with that in mind, sir, can you please speak to positive steps or best practices that the Secretariat has taken and continues to take in respect to providing leadership, ongoing support, consistent implementation of new, more streamlined approaches to managing and administering all of these things? In other words, best practices of doing their job. We need to be able to build upon that, sell that, and critique that. So I'd like your observations on that, please.
I think the report overall is quite positive on the steps taken by the Secretariat. We referred to things like coordinating activities amongst departments, encouraging departments to improve their practices, supporting interdepartmental committees, supporting pilot projects, and some other things that the Secretariat did that were steps forward in how grants and contributions were managed. And we saw lots of good activities happening at the organizational level as they were implementing this. I guess, though, overall, the one thing that was a little, that we noted in particular was there were lots of good activities both at the Secretariat and the departmental level, but part of the original objective was to reduce the impact, the administrative burden on recipients, and up to the point that we did the audit, that part hadn't been done. And that's a very important part. I guess when you speak of best practices, it's one thing to sort of, put changes in place, make changes, but there has to be a way of making sure that those changes are going to have the impact they were intended to have at the beginning.
Fine. Thank you very much. To Treasury Board, Controller, Assistant. Natural resources, in our, of course, the Auditor General's report, the Public Health Agency, Canadian International Development Agency, they're all expected to complete the development of their service standards. When?
Well, I'll allow my colleagues to answer in their own case. I can tell you that in 2011, with our the Management Accountability Framework exercise, that 17 of the 21 departments that were to develop service standards had begun that work and had implemented some forms of service standards already. That is almost 2 years old, and my expectation would be that when we review the status of things this summer and in the early fall, that that number and the number of departments that have implemented or increased the number of service standards they're dealing with will also increase. Treasury Board Secretariat itself, earlier this year, we introduced a toolkit dealing with the development of standards. Our Chief Information Officer, who's responsible for service standards, has issued guidance in the last number of months to departments and agencies about the creation and the life cycle attached with service standards. So I think we're seeing the inculcation of this concept and this culture of service standards moving forward. I will not sit here and say it's at the mature level that everyone would look for across town, but I would say that departments and agencies are consciously moving forward with implementation in their own domains.
Well, fine, and I don't have the time, Chair, obviously, to go through each and every department here, unfortunately. So what I might do is just throw a question to all of the respective departments assessed here. If any of the department officials feel that they have a significant problem and or challenge with not meeting reasonable timelines to move forward, I'd like you to declare that to this committee now, so that if we're looking at this issue a year or 2 years down the road and you still have not been able to maybe complete the original ask, then we have a problem. If you feel it's well underway and is under control and you're moving forward with the recommendations and you feel a level of comfort with the grants and risk assessments and that so be it. So I just give you an opportunity. I don't need a response, but if someone feels that they have a real challenge ahead of them that might pose some unknown risks, please identify that now.
I'll forward that opportunity to our representatives. Is there anyone who wants to take advantage of Mr. Cramp's offer? Okay, that's good, Mr. Cramp.
Okay, fine. One more quick question.
No, sorry, sir.
Oh.
Next time.
Okay.
Your time has expired significantly, I might note. Okay, over now to Madame Blachette-Lemoutte. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all our witnesses for coming today. And congratulations, Mr. Scrimgeour. Usually the Auditor General's report points out how the government has implemented its action plan, and I'd like to come back to something that was raised earlier about the impact of that action plan. The goal was to reduce the administrative burden for recipients, but nothing happened that would allow us to be able to assess the impact of this plan. You stated that you don't know why leadership wasn't taken in terms of that impact assessment. So who would know the answer to that question? Who would know why it didn't happen? Were you there when that action plan was drawn up? And if you weren't, then who do you think is responsible for forgetting to do that?
Part of the process that developed the action plan back in the year 2006. I don't believe that the people developed the action plan forgot about the need to have some sense of the impact of the reforms on recipients and applications. And indeed, in previous incarnations, I spent some very uncomfortable moments in front of the Official Languages Committee answering questions just of that nature in this House. So I think the issue really is that we didn't identify at that time the need to have an instrument that allowed us to gather consistently information across and aggregate it to provide that pan-government picture. So again, I would focus that I believe the initial focus was really on the departments and the work they were doing in their action plans. And you know, it's become clearer that we need to have a better mechanism to gather evidence to demonstrate the progress that's been made beyond anecdote and stories. And I think that's what we're dealing with now.
Merci. Thank you. I think I'll go a little further into this because what you're saying is very interesting. So you said no one forgot anything, but a need wasn't necessarily identified to assess the impact of this plan. So I'm a little surprised. It's not the first time that this sort of judgment is used. In other words, that there isn't a need for something. Let me take, for example, the action plan for the economy. At the end of the line, we didn't know what the real impact of that action plan was on the economy because there were no measures that were taken that would allow us to determine whether that economic action plan had actually allowed the economy to recover. So perhaps, Mr. Scrimshaw, you can help me understand. Do not think that this should automatically be included when we invest money and when we implement an action plan. Do not think that automatically then there should be an effective assessment of the impact of that plan, regardless of the action plan that is being implemented.
Hindsight in this matter is tremendous. I think if in 2006 we had understood the scope of the effort that would be required to achieve the change we're looking for, we would have been somewhat surprised. I can only come back to the fact that the requirement to be able to demonstrate impact and success was not forgotten. I think the Auditor General has, brought us up on the fact that we did not have a consistent way of presenting a pan-government picture. I suspect the departments and agencies can certainly provide a much richer viewpoint of what's happened inside their own organizations, but it is important that we can build that pan-government picture that is the same story that's coming to us any number of enterprises. There's a greater interest in being able to talk about the entity and the impact of things on the entity as the Government of Canada. And on a moving forward basis, I cannot see the same oversight, if you wish, being made. I can't speak back to what happened 7 years ago, but I would absolutely repeat that there was a clear desire and interest on the government to understand the impact. We may not have had the right tool in place to do so.
Thank you. Over now to Mr. Shipley, and you, sir, now have the floor.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, and thank you, Auditor General, for being with us, and all of the witnesses again. First of all, I just want to say thank you to the Secretary General, to the Treasury Board Secretary, that office, of taking the initiative. I found it interesting in your last remarks, Mr. Scrimshaw, that you didn't understand the full context of what it would take for the scope of this project. I liken that just in my mind of those that have had the opportunity to renovate an old house as compared to building a new house. And there are always, like in renovation or the upgrades in an old house to make it modernized, those unknowns, we see it here in these buildings, those unknowns that never show up until you actually get into it. Whereas if you're building a new house, you've got the plans, everything's laid out, and you start from scratch. And so identifying the need, I want to thank you for your office back in 2006 of striking that independent blue ribbon panel. Just for those that maybe have not understood that, what that independent, maybe you could help me, and that may go to the Auditor General or to the Secretariat. The independent panel, how many were on it and who was it?
My apologies. I don't think I've got the panel names and
was there ever any issue ever come up because it was an independent panel that there was some sort of infiltration of anything that what they recommended was not the right way to go, Mr. Auditor General? Or
yes, if I may respond to that. No, there was. I can say that first of all, it was an independent panel. It consisted primarily, I believe, of former deputy ministers, but who understood government and governance very well. and certainly the recommendations they made rang true with what we had already understood. I could say, for example, in the First Nations file, we had been hearing for quite a while since our audit of 2003 that they were finding the reporting burden extremely difficult for them, especially for small communities, et cetera. So what the Blue Ribbon panel said was very consistent.
I think what it reads, quite honestly, is that in 2006, unfortunately, we did take that position to unravel some of the complexities, what people call red tape and bureaucracy. I guess that's not maybe a good word, but unfortunately, that's what it gets rang out to be. I'm just wondering, though, because there is always that concern when we do those things, looking for efficiencies and effectiveness, that in fact we have limited the scope, and that what we're going to be doing now is shoving some stuff underneath just to make sure that we can get through a process quicker. Mr. Auditor General, has that been any indication of that?
No.
Okay. In your report, Mr. Auditor General, number 9, you talked about the adequate guidance to ensure the risk ratings are accurate and remain current. I'm just going to skip down. As such, we found the process used by the federal government we examined varied in rigor and depth. To the Auditor General, is it that each department will use the same template? And then to Mr. Scrimgeour, in your presentation, on number 2, through the action plan, each department developed through their individual plans to improve delivery of grant and contribution. I just need to understand how that's going to work between those two comments to make sure that actually what we're coming up with is that there is, when this comes back, that, well, you said this was going to be a template of each for depth and rigor, but actually I understand, I think, that each department is an individual that have now come together, and you've mentioned that, in terms of working together rather than in its own silos. So maybe just help me understand that a little better.
Perhaps I'll take a crack at
Sure.
trying to provide you an answer to your question. When it came to risk rankings, and I will speak to my experience at the time, was in a department, in a grant and contribution department, that most departments and agencies, at least at a beginning point, develop their own risk rating criteria, the risk ranking criteria. They were the individuals that were most familiar with the business lines they were dealing with. The guidance is, of course, meant to provide some consistency in approach and methodology without tying the hands of a department to a single risk rating approach across town. Experiences change over a 7 or 8 year period. One of the areas we're entering into now in the management or administration of grants and contributions is the concept of standardized business processes to increase efficiency in deliveries, and this can apply into a number of areas. Although I don't think we will ever have a single template for risk rating across town, there is probably an opportunity for ensuring greater consistency in the risk rating methodologies that are used by departments to ensure their completeness and their utility. And with that, I hope I've answered part of your question in that way, and the Auditor General can certainly chip in if I've got it wrong.
I think the only other thing, I think your question to me was whether all of the organizations were using the same template. And I think at the time that we did the audit, we found that that there were inconsistencies in how different organizations were assessing risks. So I think the direct answer to the question, as I understood it, was at the time that we did the audit, not everybody was using exactly the same approach.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Time has well expired. Thank you very much. Over now to Mr. Byrne. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. To Mr. Ferguson or to Mr. Barrett. Just to help us understand the scope of the context of this particular audit, this was, as I understand it, on basically in response to the Blue Ribbon Panel, the government's action plan of the Blue Ribbon Panel, and that was more about the compliance requirements of recipients of grants and contributions post-award, as opposed to the processes of establishing the grant or contribution. Would that be a correct statement?
That's correct.
So to help us put this in context, this would not, and we know that you did not audit the Border Infrastructure Fund, for example, but the whole process by which grants and contributions were made to, under the G8, G20 fund, to town councils and to others, where there was no application process, where there was no assessment by any department, where the applications were actually done through the minister's office. That was not part of this audit. This is, would that be clear?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think that's a very fair statement. Whereas in the past we've done audits of grants and contributions where we've actually been a compliance-focused audit, and here are all the requirements in terms of following a grant and contribution agreement, and are they doing it, such as the different steps along the process. In this one, the focus was much more on, are they implementing what they said they would implement in the government action plan. So we specifically, and we state in our focus of the audit, that we did not seek to see if compliance was being followed on every agreement.
Thank you. I think that's very important. I hope we all take note of that for the production of our draft report, to put that in some context. Now, I want to move to Mr. Scrivener. It was very important in this context for compliance for the client, to improve the efficiency of the client and the reporting requirements of the client here. There was a client had a risk of audit exposure based on the risk estimate that was established during the formation of the T's and C's, the terms and conditions of the contribution agreement. Would that be correct? Because, of course, audit is it's a heavy burden on a client. So one of the things that it was established here was that audit exposure would be somewhat based on the risk of the client itself.
I think that the statement that in most departments the determination of which clients, if you wish, to perform a recipient audit on would be based in some measure on the risk that it's assessed around the capability of the client by the department. And risk, as I understand it, is a factor of familiarity of the client to the department. In other words, if a particular client has been a long-term recipient of a grant or contribution arrangement with a particular department, and they've been satisfactory, they've upheld their terms and conditions satisfactory, their risk of audit is much lower. Would that be fair to say? If we're speaking in those generalities, I would say yes. So familiarity lowers risk, and of course, the audit function, it not only reduces the burden on the client, but it also reduces the burden on the contracting agency. For example, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency has totally dismantled its internal audit function, and one of the concerns that I would have is that an organization like ACOA or Western Economic Diversification would actually have an incentive to only want to, or to preferentially want to contract grants and contributions, establish terms and conditions with organizations that have been long-standing business partners with ACOA or Western Economic Diversification. My concern, Mr. Scrivener, is that you've actually created a barrier to new organizations, new businesses, new clients from actually participating in the grants or contributions process, and you've actually created an advantage to long-standing clients. Because they have been long-standing clients, they are considered less risky and therefore won't draw down on the resources of a particular department through the audit function and other monitoring functions. Have you given consideration of that in terms of your overall evaluation of this particular project? I don't know if I could agree that the very narrow perspective that you've put in front of me, that those two factors, given all the other factors that come into a department and agency in deciding whether or not to provide a grant and contribution, I don't know if I can come to the same conclusion you have, that we have made it more difficult for new new recipients to come into the process. Depending on the nature of the grant and contribution program we're dealing with, clients that have established relationships with organizations, I think may have a reduced risk of additional audit, but I don't think that guarantees them necessarily that they are the only ones that are going to receive funding. And I think we're really entering into an area that involves understanding the eligibility and the assessment processes of the department.
Sorry, Mr. Byrne. Sorry, time has expired, sir. Moving now to Mr. Aspin. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to our guests. My questions are directed to Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Barrett. How do the Auditor's general recommendations and the 5-year administrative review of the policy on transfer payments align? And perhaps you could outline as well, does this create additional reporting burden to respond to both?
Be happy to address the member's question. I guess whenever we complete an audit report, we do make recommendations, and in this case, there is a recommendation that specifically speaks to the need to be monitoring, to be measuring progress, which is not too inconsistent with the notion in the departmental action, in the government's action plan, that they would have a 5-year review. Now, in essence, responding to our recommendation is different, or putting in place what we're saying is different than what's worded in the government action plan. However, and I believe Mr. Scrimger would agree that what we're recommending would actually make it easier for them as they move forward to be assessing progress.
Mr. Scrivener, I perhaps should have directed that question to you directly first.
Yeah, thank you, and Mr. Chair, I would say if the question is there additional burden because of these processes, personally I believe the answer is no. As you are entering into a policy review process, you are looking for sources of information and data and feedback. The Auditor General and its work becomes a valuable source for us as we're moving into a review stage, as do program evaluations, as do many of the pieces of work done in departments and agencies, and our own consultation processes. I would add that this does not add any burden to the recipients of grants and contributions. I mean, the work is with us in both responding effectively to the Auditor General's recommendations and in our daily work of the policy review process attached to the transfer payment policy.
Thank you. And what aspect of the action plan, in your opinion, was the most necessary to reduce the cost and administrative burden on recipients?
Again, Mr. Chair, I will express somewhat of a personal viewpoint in the sense that I believe it was the cultural shift from a world of risk aversion at any cost to a world of intelligent risk management. And that allowed, I think, departments and agencies to look at their processes and see where they can lighten up the burden based on their own analysis, their own assessment, and bringing in other instruments and tools so that we were not trying to prevent, or you were not trying to manage risk by placing the same burden on every single recipient in the department's universe. So I would say certainly that one was a key one. The second one I would answer briefly would be, and I believe it's becoming increasingly important, that departments and agencies realize that their grant and contribution programs are not so unique that they can't benefit from common business processes and standard approaches towards things. And again, certainly early in my career, we all felt our programs were so unique that they had to almost have their own system around them, and I think that viewpoint has changed quite dramatically over the last 7 or 8 years.
Okay. And I wondered if you could, Mr. Scrivener, could you please speak to the results of the pilot projects for restructuring grant and contribution agreements that TBS supported?
very briefly, there are any number of projects, but there are three ones we are certainly focusing on now in one form or another. There is a great deal of work occurring between Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada and Health Canada, and working on integrating processes for the delivery of contributions for First Nations health. And there's some, quite frankly, some very, from our viewpoint of administrators and bureaucrats, some very exciting things that are moving forward there. We had a project that was at the time between DFATE and CETA to bring together and look at the economies that could be done on the international front, but their most recent machinery decision has probably forced that one to a final conclusion, or will, in the sense that with the merging of the two organizations. And last and not least, Transport Canada, Infrastructure Canada, in working with the work that's focused on significant transfers to provinces and territories, and is there a more efficient a way of structuring those agreements. So those are sort of three, I would say, noteworthy pieces of work that are advancing at different paces and speeds, but that we have hope that will bring more efficiency into the overall process.
Thank you. Time has expired.
Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate that. And now over to Monsieur Giguère. You have the floor, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. My first question is for the Office of the Auditor General. You said in your report, in paragraph 223, that we found that none of the organizations we audited had assessed the administrative impacts of reforms comprehensively. That's quite a frank assessment. Can you tell me if this is due to the fact that the audited organizations have to limit their budgets before even knowing whether they have a proper administrative process or not? What I'm saying is, are cuts more important than respecting administrative processes?
Was, as we stated, we found that none of the organizations had assessed the administrative impact of reforms comprehensively. We didn't try to determine the reason for that. We were simply looking to see whether the organizations were doing that assessment, and we found that none of them were doing it on a comprehensive basis.
Thank you. Mr. Scrimger, you said earlier that people tried to avoid risk at any cost earlier, and now there is a more intelligent risk management approach. So my first comment is this: how can risk management be an intelligent risk management approach when there are shortcomings within that very risk model?
That is perfect. The Auditor General pointed out, and I think in his report acknowledged, that the risk rating systems were in departments and being used by departments to manage those risks. I believe the more complete observation he made is that we weren't specific enough in our guidance, or we weren't reinforcing in our guidance the requirement to review regularly the risk management model in departments and agencies. I believe in the details, the Auditor General also recognized that many departments had done that without having a specific guidance placed in the Treasury Board policy suite. So I look at it not that there is a fundamental break in the risk rating methodologies being used by departments, but that there is an element in our policy guidance that needs to be there to make it clear that you need to review the risk rating models on a regular basis to ensure that they are still legitimate. And I would open it up to the Auditor General to add to my comments.
If I could just add one point. On one hand, it's an interesting question and refers to the need to making sure that the criteria that we use and how we weight them is reviewed regularly. But I think the other point that needs to be appreciated, as we say in paragraph 244, is that there needs to be some form of review of the individual that was at one point perhaps rated as being low risk, let's say, to some years later or some time down the road to reassess that organization. Is it still low risk? Or if it was high risk and being audited every year and having lots of controls around it, is it still high risk down the road? That form of reassessment becomes very important.
On page 14, in the Secretary's report, they state that in 2012-2013, there will be a new instrument that will be used to assess benefits. Can I ask you, when will there be a report on the reforms? And I would expect that you would send us that report as soon as you will have it.
I believe they're referring to the new performance reporting tool that we are in the process of putting in place in the next several weeks. We expect, if things go according to plan, that we would be gathering the information from departments and agencies over the summer and early fall, and then would be collating the report in the fall. And we've already made, I believe, the commitment in our response to the Auditor General to make that report public once it is complete. And obviously would be pleased to provide it to the attention of the committee.
Thank you. Yeah, if you would just make that one little detail to make sure that one does come to us and what's available, that puts it into our business work.
Certainly.
So time has expired. Merci. Moving on to Mr. Hayes. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chair, I just want to refer to number 9 in the Auditor General's report, and this question is for the Auditor General. When they're referring to that the Treasury Board Secretariat had not provided organizations with adequate guidance to ensure that risk ratings are accurate and remain current. And as such, we found that processes used by federal organizations we examined varied in rigor and depth. And as a result of that, you made your recommendation 2.46. So my question to you, sir, is do you have any advice that you can provide to government officials in ensuring that risk ratings are accurate? And I think I'm going somewhere with this, because what I'm finding on this committee is we get recommendations from the Auditor General, but when I was on City Council, we'd have audited financial statements, we get recommendations from the auditors, and then city staff would have to go and source out the resources to figure out how to actually implement the recommendation of the Auditor General. And what I find is you have a lot of professional staff at your disposal. And I guess my question is, are we as a committee or a government getting the best value for your professional services in terms of, you've given us the recommendation, but I don't often see advice in terms of this is how you do it. And I think you are probably, you and your group of people are probably the most qualified people to not only make the recommendation, but to also provide assistance in terms of implementing that recommendation. So I'm just interested in your general comments on what I'm saying.
Thank you. Actually, what you've raised is something that we try to do internally when we make recommendations, is to challenge ourselves with, if you were on the receiving end of this recommendation, how would it be implemented? So that is something that we try to think about when we are making recommendations. We don't go much further than the recommendation in terms of saying, well, you could implement it this way or you could implement it that way, because really it's up to the departments or organizations to determine the best way to actually make the implementation. But certainly when we are making that recommendation, we do try to put that lens on it to make sure that we are making a recommendation that is reasonable and can be implemented. In this particular case, when we're dealing with something like risk, for example, I think we are looking at things like the question of updating the risk assessment. So if a risk assessment was made originally, and there was one level of risk assessed, but it's a longer term project, and maybe the risk needs to be assessed at later on as well throughout that same project, that make sure that type of thing is done. So I don't think here we are looking at major changes in the approaches to risk. We are looking at some improvements that can be made to augment the practices that were already in place.
So Mr. Scrimgeour, in terms of the recommendation 2.46, and I'll read it to you, the Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat should provide guidance to federal organizations on the need for a review and challenge function for initial risk assessments, as well as the need to periodically reassess the risk ratings of multi-year contribution agreements. Where are you right now in terms of your response to that recommendation, in terms of when you feel you will be in a position that you can clearly state that we have fulfilled our obligation to that recommendation?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think we are hopeful that in the upcoming weeks that we'll be able to begin our response to this recommendation through a revision to our guidelines on the directive of the transfer payment policy, in the sense that we're looking at it, I think, in the sense that we have a risk rating tool that is working in departments and agencies. The question is, how frequently and when do you use it? And so we think that as a first measure, simply bringing into the guidelines the requirement to re-rank or re-rate, risks, and to look at the other aspect of that Mr. Barrett brought up as well. We will also hold, obviously, the recommendation through our policy review process to determine if there is indeed further policy work that's required to respond effectively to the recommendation. We would also look at whether any of the tools and instruments that have been developed over the last 5 years dealing with risk needed to be updated in any way to again reinforce where we want to go with this. And so we think there's a number of ways that we'll be able to respond effectively to the Auditor General's recommendation in this regard.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Time's expired, and so we'll move now to Mr. Byrne.
Thank you. I'll just follow up on my previous line of questioning to Mr. Scrimgeour. In answer to my question regarding whether or not funding agencies are being held, are somewhat captive to the usual suspects as opposed to being open to new clients, you had indicated that one of the reasons why you can't draw that same conclusion at this point in time because, and I'm now going to infer, it's not that the evidence doesn't necessarily exist in that regard, it's just that there has been no assessment of the evidence as to whether or not that actually may have been an unintended consequence of this reform. Would that be correct?
Again, it's difficult for me to agree that an unintended consequence of the reform would be that it increased the difficulty of new clients based solely on, or not based solely, but on your I think your assertion that the risk ranking or the risk rating and the familiarity is going to determine to such I guess a dominant level, who is going to receive funding. I believe the answer is a lot more complex than that. I think there are so many other variables that come into the funding decision.
Understood, Mr. Scrimgeour, but the reality is the answer to the question ultimately is not to be held by you or I as a personal opinion. It's to be done through analytical assessment. And the fact is that one of the concerns of the Auditor General is that there was no post-program assessment of the consequences to clients from some of these reforms. Would that be fair to say? And if there's a contradictory point of view to that, then I'll ask Mr. Ferguson to respond.
I believe the Auditor General has indicated clearly that there was not a comprehensive instrument that allowed us to speak to the impact on recipients of the desired impact for improved administration and reduced burden. The question you're asking me is whether or not it impacted the funding decision itself, and I just don't feel capable of going there.
Right, you don't, because there has been no post-assessment. I will now move to the whole issue of grants versus contributions. One of the easiest way to ease the burden on recipients, financial assistance recipients, is to simply move to a total grant system as opposed to a contribution system. There are no terms and conditions related associated with a grant. Contributions, however, have by their very nature terms and conditions, and they're accessible and they're auditable. Why didn't you move strictly to a grant system as opposed to maintaining a contribution system as well?
I don't think the intention of the reform was to move all of the Government of Canada to one versus the other. I believe the design decision around whether a grant or a contribution is the more appropriate instrument is one that's made by the departmental teams and working with their minister and through the decision-making process that provides the authority for those at the end of the day.
Well, Mr. Scrimgeour, one of the concerns that was raised by the Office of the Auditor General in 2001 and 2006 was that the government actually was indeed moving more and more towards a granting system as opposed to the accountability of a contribution system. And there was a criticism and a concern that was raised by the Office of the Auditor General at that time. In 2005, total votable grants and contributions totaled $27 billion. Now, total grants and contributions, votable grants and contributions authorized by Parliament, is $37 billion per year. How much, the Auditor General expressed the concern that the Government of Canada was moving more and more to a granting-based system as opposed to a contribution-based system. The concern was that grants do not have accountability built into them. Of the $37 billion now in grants and contributions, how much of that is grants and how much of that is contributions? Have we actually moved to limit the use of grants and move more towards contribution agreements?
I'm afraid I don't have the number in front of me of the split between grants and contributions, but I would comment, Mr. Chair, on your comment that there is no accountability with grants. I would suggest that between a grant and a contribution, there are different accountabilities that departments have between the two instruments. Certainly, there is a larger accountability regime attached to most contribution agreements, but there is also the accountability that's required in departments when they're dealing with grants that very much focuses on ensuring the eligibility of the individual or the organization receiving that grant, having been confirmed or verified. When it comes to your other question, I really don't have an ability to answer.
Would you be able to provide it in a reasonable time period? Mr. Chair, I'll leave that to you as to what the reasonable time period is based on our previous discussions. But Mr. Ferguson, would you
move
be
quick
able to,
because you're over time.
Would you be able to comment on some of these aspects, or Mr. Barrett?
Thank you. This will be the final question for this rotation.
We don't have the breakdown either, of the amount between grants and contributions. So I don't think really there's much more that I can add.
Okay. Thank you. Moving along, Mr. Williamson, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming today, everyone. I'm kind of hesitant to drill a little too deeply just because of the vast sums we're dealing with. And one concern I have with an approach that tries to assess the risk is that over time they become dull, or people just assume all is well, when in fact, based on past practices, when in fact things could be changing. So I'm curious to ask the departments how the risk assessment process has affected monitoring and reporting requirements, and what's being done to stay on top of this reporting requirements and not rest on our laurels and to assume things are well going forward. We can start at that end or this end, and whatever you like, or alphabetically, I'll leave it up to you to decide, or Mr. Chair, you can decide.
Talking about the risk, the reviewing the risk assessment itself, or the reporting and audit of the recipients?
The auditing of the recipient end, I think, to ensure that the tax dollars are being spent as we believe they should be.
I'll try and give that a start. I think at CETA, we have a strong mix of process and tools in our risk management toolbox. We assess risks at the program level, the country level, the recipient level, the individual assessment level, and we have a risk framework that helps us determine the level of administration that a recipient would be bound to provide, depending on the situation in the country, the amount of the contribution, or whether it's a grant, whether there is local capacity, whether we have their known quantity, their financial capacity, and that would drive whether and how we would do a recipient audit. Whether we do that at the desktop by seeking information from the recipient on their details of the payments and the costs that they've incurred, or whether we actually go and do an audit of the individual project. So our audit plans, we can't audit everyone around the world, but they are risk-based audit plans that are renewed every year.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We actually do the risk assessment a minimum of twice on the life of an actual project. When the project and recipient proposal first comes in, the initial risk assessment is done. It's driven by a number of factors that are built into our systems to ensure consistency of risk assessment project to project and across all recipients. It will then determine whether or not there's low, medium, or high risk associated with the individual project, and then the level of intervention and working with the monitoring and reporting requirements that are then projected onto the recipient to act accordingly. At a minimum, we also review it prior to then the actual processing of any claims. So before any money actually flows, we actually reassess. Because our average project is approximately 2.5 to 3 years in life, so a lot of that risk assessment needs to be revalidated before we actually flow any funds. So the risk assessment is reevaluated at time using the exact same process to see if anything new has happened in the interim over that time period that would then require additional either beefing up or easing of the actual reporting or monitoring burden that we would then put on the recipient. In addition, if there was any information that became available or aware to the department in the interim that obviously required a reassessment of the risk that we became aware of, that would also. So it doesn't prevent us from also reassessing during the life cycle of the project in addition to those two steps.
Okay. Do I have time for another response?
You have another minute.
Ms. Gardner, please.
I would say ours is very similar to Dawn's. In the Department of Nature SDC, we have a risk-based approach to 3 specific areas: financial reporting, payments, and monitoring. Similar, there's 3. We use a number of factors that we use to determine the risk base for each of those components. And as Dawn said, throughout the life cycle of a project, if a project is a 3-year project, we can take the opportunity to look at that risk over the period of time. And also, if there's anything that would come up during the project that we would see as problematic, we have the opportunity to go in, review the project, and see if there's anything that needs to be monitored or changed based on those assessments.
Okay. Can I hear from Mr. Baudouin? And Mr. Baudouin. Or Badon, excuse me.
Thank you. For the health agency, very similar to my colleagues, we have developed criteria at the portfolio level with Health Canada and the CIHR, where we've developed criteria to evaluate risk on a number of factors and then rank essentially the applicants and the recipients into high, medium, low risk based on that assessment. And from there, that determines or helps us guide the level of monitoring and documentation we will receive from our recipients during the year, including informing the audit and monitoring plans at the departmental level for those recipients.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you. Time has expired. Moving along. Now we have Mr. Allen, who now has the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Go back to Mr. Ferguson, and perhaps Mr. Scrimgeour. If I can take us back to page 4 on the English version, Chapter 2, Exhibit 2.1, which is there's a 2006 report from the Blue Ribbon Panel, then a Government Action Plan of 2008. It's a very lovely sort of flow chart, block flow chart, if you will, with Treasury Board on the top and TBS leadership and ongoing support at the bottom, and then this implement change across organizations in the middle. The arrows flow to that. They then flow out to the recipients, which in the box says reduced administrative burden. If you can help me with, should it have been another arrow on this thing? I mean, it seems to me that what I heard Mr. Scrimgeour say earlier to me about getting something back from recipients that told you whether, told the departments whether indeed did all of this help them? Did they do better? Did they save money? Did they feel a burden was reduced? That somehow we sent it out to them, but we never bothered to have an arrow coming back in the other way that just simply said, tell us how you're making out. I mean, am I oversimplifying that, or am I, headed down a wrong path with this? I'm certainly not an auditor by any stretch of the imagination, but is it not quite that simple? An arrow coming back the other way, it says, let us know, or report, whatever we want to term we want.
First of all, I need to explain that this exhibit is an exhibit that we prepared in the Office of the Auditor General, so this was not an exhibit of the government's overall, process and accountability cycle. This was just us trying to explain the front end of what was happening, that there was the blue ribbon panel, that there was the action plan, and that the intention was reducing the administrative burden on the recipient. So we were just trying to explain sort of that context. This wasn't an attempt to try to describe the whole process and all of the accountability. But again, this is our chart. This isn't a chart that belongs to the government or any department.
Fair enough, but maybe Mr. Scrimgeour would have liked the chart. If it had been theirs, we might have had an arrow coming back the other way. But since it's actually not your chart, Mr. Scrimgeour, there's no point in asking you to tell us it unless you have a chart somewhere that's close to this and you want to actually just send it to the chair. And so I guess looking at your action plan, which you provided, which is not in the report, I think it's dated April 13th this year, it talks about performance reporting for recommendation 2.26. It says that you intend to have that piece completed by late 2013. Can you give me an update as to where you think you are? Are you on track with that, or is it delayed slightly, or are you ahead of schedule? I'm not going to hold you to it, sir, that you say, well, we think November, it turns out to be December, or it turns out to be September. Just a general consensus where you are.
I think we are very close to actually releasing the guidance to departments in the next couple of weeks, which is the timeline we wanted. And barring something unforeseen occurring in the actual data gathering stage, we are looking to be able to aggregate information this fall. And I don't think my crystal ball can go further than that. Things are looking positive.
And I appreciate that. I wouldn't hold you to the crystal ball. I think that's why I paraphrased it that way, sir. Crystal balls are wonderful things on a desktop with snow in them. And again, to your last recommendation, 2.46 of the Auditor General, it actually says that you believe the new guidance policy schedule should be issued this month. How are we making out with that one?
Again, it's my expectation that the new guidance will be issued before the end of the month, and if it slips into the first week of May, perhaps, but we believe we're at that stage.
So we look forward to seeing, because I believe what the intent is to release them publicly, not immediately. Obviously, it does kind of suggest a later date. Any sense about when that sort of becomes a public piece? I think the first recommendation clearly says that. It says the plan results, and there's a sense of that we'll see something. No doubt on the website. I'm not suggesting you're going to send us a report, but is that true? That we'll see that fairly soon?
This is also linked to our work plan around the review of the policy and transfer payments, which we are expecting to complete before the end of the current fiscal year. So if I can use that as a very broad backstop, I would say that we would expect all of this to be certainly the part of the survey to be released before the end of the fiscal year. I don't have any other date.
Time has expired. Thank you. And now for our last member to take the floor on our normal rotation, Mr. Dreeshen. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses today. One of the things we're talking about is risk assessment. We also have impact assessment and as well the administrative burden. So as we go through the report, there's a couple of things, and some of the things that I've heard earlier. For example, Mr. Barrett, you had indicated that sometimes these departments are coming together and they've been fostering some innovative change. You've also said sometimes it was from 7 agreements down to 1 agreement, from 126 reports down to 26 reports. And yet there's no measurement. I submit that there's a measurement right there as we take a look at what is happening. One of the other statements in the report we have in Section 223, we talked about, for example, Western economic diversification, its tracking of its costs in conducting recipient audits, the reduction from 738,000 in 2008 and 9 to 34,000 in 2011 and 12. So, and again, the rationale was focusing on the high risk recipients. And I saw another file in here, basically on 251, where we're talking about the Human Resources and Skills Development Canada. They have began tracking service standards. They started that in 2010, as well as Western Economic Diversification did its tracking of service standards since January 2007. So I guess what I'm suggesting in here is that maybe no one sat down and said, let's take a look at this and say that we are assessing the risk assessments and the opportunities for for people not to worry so much about the dollars. Actually, some amazing things happened when this money was being presented to the public. You were finding smaller organizations that needed help, that were able to go to other larger municipalities, and they would say, this is how you make out these kinds of application forms. These are the things that you need to have in order to work within the system. And I think that's really when, and especially here when we have the 4 different departments and 5 different entities. I think we saw that people were looking at this as an opportunity to move forward, and they didn't get caught up so much in the burdens. Now, I understand the rationale where you say, well, we'd like to see the step-by-step and how it is that you do this in the future. And fortunately, we've kind of got together, so now we have some opportunity to breathe a little bit, and we're going to be able to put it down in more for everyone else's discussion. So I guess that's part of it, and I think especially if the very small organizations, Volunteer Week is coming up next week, and in a lot of cases you're asking people that are volunteers to get in there and try to come up with all of the grants that they have to cover, whereas you go to a municipality, they have departments that are lined up to be able to make that occur. And I'm just hoping that when we get into the assessment side of things, we don't say, well, this is the plan that we have to have and it has to go this way, because I think it's important that we get those types of things put together. And I guess the other thing that I would like to comment on is the consultation process, because I believe this is another item, and again, Western Economic Diversification had gone through this. I read again in the report, I believe there's something like 80 different consultations that meetings that they had in all 4 of the provinces, and where you were explaining the rationale for the revised focus and how future budget allocations would work. So I suppose after going through all of those different items, if I could have, from the AG's office and perhaps from Western Diversification, just how do you see this working in the future, and how can we make sure that smaller entities are able to work their way into these kinds of projects without that extra burden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, first of all, certainly throughout this audit, we acknowledged that, many good things had occurred, and that there were pilot projects that were trying to streamline things, and there was a lot of good progress made. I think in paragraph 23, we specifically said, though, that the assessment of the administrative impact of the reforms hadn't been done comprehensively. And we did acknowledge that there were specific areas where the streamlining of the activities were in fact measured. So the issue for us was sort of that overall impact, hadn't been measured comprehensively. Again, there were many good things that we noted, and they are noted in the report. But, you know, to give sort of an example, you could have a possibility where a program is changed, and this isn't a real life example. This is just sort of to try to understand some of this. You could have a situation where organizations are no longer required to submit, you know, as many reports, applications, and that type of thing, which on the surface would look like, okay, you've reduced the administrative impact on the organization. But in fact, if the organization still has to prepare all of that information and keep it on hand in case they are audited, then the only thing that has changed for them is whether they have to send it in or not. And so the actual impact on that organization in that case may in fact, the reduction may in fact be very small, right? So there were lots of good things, but it's still important to go back and make sure, because it was one of the intended objectives to try to reduce the administrative burden on recipients, to assess the degree to which that's happened.
Okay. Mr. McDonald? Sorry, time has expired, but Mr. McDonald, I'll give you a chance if it's real brief, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think a number of the initiatives that we've taken to really respect the fact that, you know, not all recipients are created equally, and, you know, for instance, some of the latest initiatives under Budget 2012, the Economic Action Plan, you're going from large municipalities to very small not-for-profit organizations that may be relying on more volunteers. We've taken a number of initiatives to streamline the application process, to actually move to use of technology for online application processes, to try and assist organizations to be able to get the information in without increasing the administrative burden. We also monitor our service standards and our client consultations when we're going out, for instance, in that initiative where we talked 80 different meetings to look at proposed changes to our programming. We're listening very much to some of the concerns that are coming back, and so speaking to, you know, recipients that we're familiar with, but also new recipients, and seeing what their expectations of our programming are going forward. So very much, it's a continuous improvement through the feedback that we receive in administering and managing these programs.
Thank you very much. Time has expired. I don't know whether you're planning to place a motion or not based on what you just told me. We have now concluded the natural rotation of the committee. Unless there's interventions to the contrary, it would be my intent to wrap this up. In terms of loose ends, Mr. Byrne, you had earlier been having some discussion with witnesses about information. Were you satisfied you got what you wanted, or is there an outstanding item you were still seeking?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I had asked our witness, since I had asked the question of whether or not he could provide the committee with factual information about the value, the total dollar value of grants and contributions voted by Parliament today, and what the percentage or what the amount was for grants, what the amount was for contributions, and also to put that in a context of, in a comparison to the Auditor General's report of 2006, in which there was some criticism that the Government of Canada was moving more and more to a granting-based system rather than a contribution-based system. So if the witness, either Mr. Ferguson or Mr. Scrimgeour, could provide us with a discussion about that, that would be helpful. But at this point in time, I'll just ask for that factual information, and Alex and I have already had a discussion about getting that. The only question that remains, Mr. Chair, is if you agree to that through you, just the time frame of being able to be provided that information.
All right. Quickly, hopefully we can conclude this quickly. We understand what's being sought. Number one, will we get it? Number two, when? Mr. Scrimgeour?
Mr. Chair, if I can, we will be quite pleased to work with the clerk and give you a response to that as quickly as we can. Obviously, I want to check how quickly we can assemble the data and get back to you. We will make our best efforts to get it to you as quickly as we can.
All right.
And we'll identify a time frame to the clerk so you can review it.
All right.
That meets your requirements.
It does for now. I will commit to the committee. I'll bring that back to the committee for the first meeting following receiving that information. The committee can determine whether it's acceptable or not. Mr. Cramp?
Chair, I understand the request and the need for requests, and I have no challenge with asking for requests of our witnesses. I would just only be mindful as well if it's, you know, is it spurious? Is it needed? Is it necessary? I'm not offering comment on this, but understand that there's a cost to everything. And if this is something that would be maybe $4,000 or $5,000, $10,000 worth of investigative work, but all of a sudden if we're into hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of calculations and tabulations, is it money well spent? I would just ask this committee to bear that in mind whenever we ask for information.
No,
that's all.
That's fair. That's fair. And that's a standard approach to things. But I haven't heard anything at all from our witnesses that said that this was suggested this was going to be a problem. So your point is noted, Mr. Byrne.
Just to provide some comfort to my colleague, this was a major piece that was reviewed by the Office of the Auditor General in 2001 and 2006. It was an issue that the Auditor General had raised, and so therefore not only would I think this would be useful for us as a follow-up to be able to chart the circumstance, but also for our analyst, since it has been raised on the record, to actually put a context to the information vis-a-vis the previous Auditor General's reports, which are tabled to this committee and available to us as if they were evidence today.
Okay, I don't think that's a problem. Alex has heard the request, so that we'll not only get the answer, but we'll ask Alex to provide a little contextual, historical context for it. Okay?
That's fine.
And if the committee's fine with that, I'm not seeing anybody racing to get the floor, so I'm assuming that's fine. I bring to the attention of members that this Thursday we will be report writing, and next Tuesday we have another public hearing, and that one is from the Fall 2012 report of the Auditor General, Chapter 3, Protecting Canadian Critical Infrastructure Against Cyber Threats. So that will be next Tuesday at the same time as this hearing was held. So with that, I will thank our guests. I'm seeing a hand. Mr. Saxton.
Here we go. One of our members, who's our resident accountant, does have a few more questions of the witnesses. It's not uncommon in this committee that since our witnesses are here, though, assembled, that we would afford him that opportunity. And of course, if the opposition wishes to have a similar opportunity, they certainly would be able to as well. So I would ask that we allow one more question from the government side, one more round, one more questionnaire from the government side.
Okay.
And I offer that to the opposition as well if they choose to have one.
We can do that. I would just, in terms of consistency, in the past this has been somewhat, can be controversial as to whether or not we're going to go into camera to do other business, adjourn, or create new rotation. We can do it. It just takes the majority of the committee. But I do want to mention to the government that they're initiating this. Normally, when we do extensions, it's because there's been a lot of difficult questions, complex questions. The answers weren't able to come out in the 5 minutes we have, so people are anxious, and it's clear to the public that there are a lot more issues there to be raised. It makes all the sense in the world. I'm just pointing out that that wasn't this kind of rotational discussion, and therefore it does set a bit of a precedent that the government is setting that the opposition will be entitled to in the future without necessarily having to make the case that there's justification, just a desire. So I say that, and as a precautionary note, but the motion is in order. We have a motion that we do one more round, one from each caucus. Any debate? Mr. Allen?
The only dilemma, Mr. Chair, would be, of course, if the bells ring, what do we intend to do?
Standard procedure.
Fair enough. I mean, I'd say that just as a precautionary tale. I'm looking at the clock, it says 10 after. If the bells ring and someone says the bells are ringing, we need to go, in which case, now I don't expect that to happen from my colleague across the way, but because I think he's offered that up, so.
Okay, I just,
again, raise with the issue.
Sorry. No, you're right, Mr. Allen, and we have procedures for votes, and this is not something new. I would just mention to colleagues that I did say that there was an important piece of business that at some point we need to be getting at. It will wait till Thursday, but it can't wait for long, and it really is important. But I'm not going to inject myself any further in this debate. The floor is open on a motion to have one more rotational question from each of the caucuses. Floor is open. Hearing no further debate, I will go to Mr. Shipley.
Just a quick question. You're talking about a precedent. We're still the bells haven't gone yet, or we're not at 5:30 or quarter after. I'm sort of wondering what the precedent is, because we've often gone another question in each one to get to the end of the meeting. I'm not sure what the precedent is.
Oh, well, it was merely, it's experience. I've been in this chair and on this committee long enough to know what's controversial and what's not, and oftentimes having further questions in rotation is controversial. And usually the opposition has to make an argument that the government accepts that there is merit in going further. To just do it in the absence of that, I'm just pointing out that it does create a bit of a precedent that in the future, to make that motion, there's not a requirement on the government or on the opposition to be making a case as to why. It was just a matter of the lead of the government benches that said, I've got another member who would like a question, and that's all it takes. And in the future, you can expect that there will be comparable motions that come in the future where we don't have that circumstance. That's all I'm pointing out. I just want it noted because experience. Further discussion, further debate. Hearing none. Mr. Saxton.
I think we now have an issue with the time, because if you see the clock, it's 10 after.
Yeah, we can get close to it though. If you want, we can shorten them to 3 minutes. I think we can still get one each. They're half-hour bells, I suspect.
Okay, let's shorten them to 3 minutes.
Okay, you want to shorten it? Here, let's try this. A 3-minute round, one from each caucus. Are you okay with that as the motion? Great. Let's just move to that. We've had enough debate, I think, but I will respect anyone who wants the floor. Hearing none. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate. Thank you. Down. Any opposed? Hearing none. In rotation. Who's first on the government side? Mr. Hayes, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question hasn't been answered yet, at least to my knowledge, unless I missed it. But it's understood from the Auditor General that the government has not assessed the impact of our implementing the government action plan. That became very clear. And my colleague, Mr. Williamson, asked our recipients about the risk factors that they put in place. But I want to ask each of our recipients, what is, thus far, the impact of the changes incorporated on you as a recipient? Because I don't believe anybody's asked that question, and that was one of the recommendations that came forward. And I think it's a fair question that probably should have been asked earlier.
Okay. Who wants to take a stab at that? Don't all rush at once.
No, I think I'll have to turn over to my colleagues in the departments, but any one of them can start off.
Okay.
Just like to clarify the question, what do you mean by the impact on us?
Well, in 2008, there was an action plan. The government had a responsibility. This was put forward to you, and I want to understand, when that was put forward to you, what has the impact of that action plan been on you as a recipient?
Okay, as a recipient department, the impact has been, I think that the impact has been positive for us at the health agency. We've worked much more broadly with our partners, within the health portfolio, and also within the broader government to put together tools. We're working actively on a system now with ANDC and Health Canada to give us better tools to manage these files. We're working on web processes as well to give better access to our recipients. So I would say it's positive. It's a change of how we manage things. It's a complete change in how we view our recipients and our relation with the recipients.
Thank you.
I would say from our perspective, it was an excellent opportunity. The department developed a departmental action plan to respond to the request, and it was the beginning actually of improving the relationships that we have with our stakeholders, improving the processes that we have in our department. We put in place service standards. We put in place standardized processes and an engagement strategy with stakeholders. But we've continued that on right now and developed standardized processes for our recipients in terms of application processes, standardized agreements. Our department is very large, and there was probably about 30 programs across the department that use different processes. So just putting that standardization in place in the department was, I think, a benefit for stakeholders as well as ourselves. And now we're moving into an online environment, so that's another bonus. And I think our stakeholders have said to us that that's something that they're really looking forward to.
Thank you.
From the perspective of Western economic diversification, again, very positive over the time period, and I think it's enabled us to really concentrate on applying a real, as I think as Mr. Scrimger referenced it earlier, an intelligent risk management approach to really fairly assess what is high, medium, and low risk and act accordingly, and then actually tailor our interventions with those recipients accordingly and be able to notice a difference between high and low risk, as evidenced in the report, where we've seen a drastic reduction in our recipient audit costs and obviously administrative burden that then flows through to those recipients in that time period. Also, the movement to the adoption of service standards and our review of those service standards and what they're telling us to be able to look at continuous improvement of our administration of grants and contributions. And then finally, the move to online applications and eventually the online claims process, which again will ease the burden. In addition, we've actually seen greater collaboration across all the regional development agencies, so like organizations that are doing very similar delivery across Canada, that we've been able to share best practices amongst. Informally, we've actually set up that opportunity to share best practices and look at, are there other things that other departments are doing that we can learn from as well, in addition to the work that's being led by the interdepartmental committees.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. McDonald. Very quickly, Ms. Stimpson, please.
Very quickly, I think it helped focus CEDA on the work that we knew we had to do anyway to consolidate and simplify and streamline. I think probably the single most important factor was risk-based administration and risk-based management of our grants and contributions. So we are making those intelligent decisions and taking in the administrative burden into account when we're making those decisions on the management.
Thank you. Good. Thank you,
Great.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You're welcome, Mr. Hayes. Now over to Mr. Allen. You have the floor, sir.
The question, Mr. Ferguson, it seems that when you look at 247, 248, 250 on program changes, it seems there was a number of, at least a few departments that seem to have a handle on getting ahead of the curve, if you will. HRSD is actually a place where you talked about in 249, looked like that they were out talking to stakeholders, they were doing some stuff. They may not have actually been doing the exact measurements that perhaps were needed, but certainly they were out talking to folks. Is that your sense, that they actually were sort of, at least it looked like there was a forward-moving aspect to that as far as getting to that point?
Yes, we could say that in terms of consulting with the stakeholders, with their recipients, they were effectively talking with them. There was communication. There's lots of record on file that they were having those communications.
And I think that's the obvious question then comes back to Mr. Scrimger. Since that's one of the departments identified inside the report, did you look to that department as a model and say, or a template and say, you know what, we're the overarching at Secretariat, at Treasury Board Secretariat. Now, since we're the overarching player in all of this, did you go out and look at them and say, you know what, they're doing a pretty good job, we should do this? And of course, the subsequent question is, if they were doing it, why weren't the rest?
I think I would answer that, the Auditor General examined 5 departments. There are some 28 that are heavily involved in this business, and I would suggest that if he had a broader scope, he would have probably found similar activities in the other departments and agencies as well. In order to keep my answer brief, I think the sharing of best practices became one of the elements of the action plan, and that the Auditor General has acknowledged the good work that was done to do that through a number of different mechanisms. And certainly I think a number of departments and agencies now are combining forces when they're sharing joint recipients in order to make the burden less in that sense.
You're looking at me for time. It's a good opportunity for me to mention the bells are now ringing. It's a half-hour bell. In my view, there's no reason why we can't conclude Mr. Allen and Mr. Byrne and then adjourn and join our colleagues for the vote in the chamber. Agreed? Thank you. Mr. Allen, you still have the floor, sir.
I'm actually going to share my time with Mr. Giguère. I'll give him the final question.
Very well. Mr. Giguère, you have...
Essentiellement...
Well, there have been massive cuts, budget cuts, especially within CEDA. Could you tell us to what extent your budgets have been cut and by how much your staff has been cut? For 2014-2015, there's a $319 million budget cut. And what percentage of your staff over the same years will be cut? For those 2 to 3 years, About 250 individuals. And what's the percentage? You mean of our staff? Yes. Well, we have approximately 2,000 in staff.
No. Sir? Monsieur? Okay. Done. Sorry. Over to Mr. Byrne. You have the floor. 3 minutes.
Mr. Chair, one of the key planks or pillars to the Blue Ribbon Panel's recommendations, and which was accepted by the government, was a duty to consult with clients on any potential changes before such changes occurred. Could I ask you, Mr. Ferguson or Mr. Barrett, to verify what I just said, to indicate what you found in that regard, if indeed what I just said is accurate, and then maybe a follow-up from Mr. Scrimgeour.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's been a little while since we reviewed the Blue Ribbon Panel report, but I know there were, I believe it was 32 recommendations, and I'm quite certain that that was one of the key aspects of it, the importance of consultation with the community that's going to be affected by the changes, and that is also why that's one of the areas that we looked at in our audit report in terms of were they conducting consultations with the recipient community.
What did you find?
That we, in all 5 cases, we did find there was some degree of consultation. And so that it wasn't a situation where they were just going ahead and making changes without any consultation. There always was. And we pointed out a couple of cases, particularly with respect to HRSDC, as has already been mentioned, and Western Economic Diversification, where we saw that there was actually very effective consultation.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Scrimgeour, would you like to follow up on that? Just leave it alone. Just leave it alone.
You got it?
Yep.
I really don't have much I can add. I believe consultation is now part of an inherent process in management of Gs and Cs in departments and agencies.
Thanks very much. Mr. Chair, with a few minutes. One of the things that I would like to explore is, the Auditor General has said in his opening comments, we also found that neither Treasury Board Secretariat nor the other federal organizations we examined had assessed the impact of their actions on recipient organizations. Mr. Scrimgeour, one of the things that I wanted to focus in on wasn't necessarily recipient organizations, it was non-recipient organizations. Would you consider, in terms of any follow-up review of the consequences of some of your decisions, also an impact on whether or not there was a consequence on non-recipient organizations? In other words, those that may have actually experienced a barrier to accessing grants and contributions because of the changes, and in part for the reasons that I described as a potential. Would you consider that, and would you commit to doing so?
I would suggest that the focus of our work will be on reducing the administrative burden to recipient organizations. I think your second question could potentially be an element that we might examine as part of a policy review, but I certainly can't commit to any specific action at this time.
Okay, sorry, time has expired, Mr. Byrne. Thank you, and thank you for your answers. So with that, I want to...
Monsieur le Président, je vous aimerais que...
Mr. Chairman, I would like CETA to provide me with some information, if that's possible, for the purposes of this study. CETA said that there were massive cuts in their staff. And in 2.31, it points out that deputy heads are the ones who supervise risk. So I would like to have the staff management plan in order to show us that CETA still has the necessary staff in order to undertake this type of a risk evaluation. Could that be submitted to the committee? Thank you.
We can provide a document.
Very well, thank you. I'm not hearing any problems there, so I will again try to conclude this. All right. I will thank our guests, Auditor General, Assistant Comptroller General, and all of our agency and department representatives. Thank you very much for being here today. And colleagues, we now stand adjourned until Thursday.